Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to Outlook 2025. It's a wonderful time to be together. We are joined by many participants at our Outlook event today. We have 4 locations where people are attending in person, plus people are joining us virtually as well. We have attendance in Birmingham, Michigan, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Sarasota, Florida, and Naples, Florida, which is where I'm located today. So we're delighted that everyone is with us. This is our highest attended Outlook event since we started hosting our annual event just over 10 years ago. I'm Nathan Mersereau, president of Planning Alternatives. We're an independent fiduciary wealth advisor. We help our clients plan for their future. And while we love crunching numbers and analyzing data, we really are focused on helping people discover what we call true wealth, which is the areas of life that are available that bring purpose and fulfillment and happiness. And that's really the point of what the money is for. And we want to help people discover true wealth. And on our website of planningalt.com, we have a true wealth assessment that I would encourage you to take and see where you stand on your journey to true wealth. Well, today we have an incredible speaker, Dan Buettner, who's the visionary behind Blue Zones. Dan's going to be speaking to us today for about 40 minutes or so, and I'll be introducing Dan further in a second here. I'm sure you have questions as we go through the presentation and listen to Dan. In-person locations, you'll notice on your table, there's a card with a QR code, and all you do is take your phone and open up that code, and you can submit questions using that QR code, and we'll be receiving those questions. And at the end of Dan's initial presentation, we'll have a whole session of Q&A of what's on your mind and getting Dan's input about the questions that you're asking. And if you're joining us, for those joining us virtually, please submit your questions through the question button, and we'll be seeing those as well. Well, I am delighted to introduce Dan Buettner, who is an explorer, a National Geographic Fellow, an award-winning journalist, a Netflix host and co-producer of 3 Emmy award-winning, 3-time Emmy award-winning Live to 100 Secrets of Blue Zones series, a 5 times New York Times bestselling author, and 3 times Guinness World Record holder for distance cycling. And Dan has discovered 5 places in the world, dubbed Blue Zones, where people live the longest, healthiest lives. And he's here to share his information with us. Dan, you've created such an impact on the world, have so many accomplishments. I know that a pinnacle of your career was our Day in the Canoe podcast conversation that we had a month ago. But I'd like to welcome you today, and we look forward to hearing your insights and learning. So welcome, Dan Buettner.
Oh, great to see you, Nathan. The pinnacle will be the second day I'm in a canoe with you, virtually or in person, ideally in the Boundary Waters canoe area where I'm from. But thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. And I'm really delighted to be here. I spent some time, as you know, we visited a few times here, and I'm really a big fan of your organization. And there's so many wealth advisors that just focus on the money, and you guys are paying attention to the big picture, which has been my specialty. And I just want to salute you for that to start out with, and not just because you invited me, but just because it's the right thing to do. And so congratulations for that. So my job over the next 40 minutes here is to convince you guys, everybody on, and by the way, thank you for taking this time, to convince you that most of what you've heard leads to a longer, healthier life is either ineffective or just plain wrong. And I'm going to do that by introducing you to 4 cultures around the world who have manifestly lived longer, manifestly lived about a decade longer than people do in this country, not at birth, but at middle age. So it's more relevant to us. And the reason they're living a long time is because they're eluding the diseases that foreshorten our lives and make our lives crappy, quite honestly. So the value proposition is enormous. It's not only more life, it's more healthy life. And as we'll sort of start to reveal towards the end, it's life with higher life satisfaction, higher day-to-day enjoyment, and that's at the end of the day what we really want. And with that, I'm going to turn on my screen here, and it's a two-step process here, so bear with me here a second. And start out by making the point that only about 20% of how long we live is dictated by our genes. Something called the Danish twin study established this a long time ago, and it's been refined since. Actually, estimates go as low as 7%. The high end, it's 25%, but 20% is a good number to think about. The other thing that will surprise people, only about 10% of how long you live is how good your doctors are and how good your healthcare plan is. So about 70% is something else. And to get at that something else, I and my colleagues at National Geographic, we got a grant from the National Institutes on Aging, set out to, in a sense, reverse engineer longevity. So in other words, if we could find the places where people who've achieved the outcomes we want, and then find the common denominator or the correlates, we can't find a causal relationship, but we can find common denominators in all these places. It would be a pretty good indicator of maybe what we might want to do if we want to mimic their success. So we found these 5 areas, and we rigorously validated birth dates and death dates, went back 150 years, spent 3 years with the National Institutes on Aging grant to really make sure these people were as old as they said they were and free of fraud and age misrepresentation as we see elsewhere in the world. But these places are really special. And then put together a team of demographers to confirm those. They produced 8 peer-reviewed studies on these blue zones. And then another team of experts who are really good at helping not only plumb the academic research, but more importantly, put together a process by which we could harvest insights. And this largely involved a survey, NIH survey, that we applied in all 5 of these blue zones. And remarkably, we found 9 common denominators, 9 secrets, you might term them. And I'm going to tell you what those are. But first, because I have the benefit of National Geographic photography, I thought I'd quickly take you to each of the 5 blue zones, and then give you the 9 secrets. So we found our first blue zone about 200 miles off the coast of Italy on the island of Sardinia, not the whole island, but just one cluster of about 70,000 people high up in the mountains, the Nuoro province. There's actually a Bronze Age culture where we found the highest concentration of male centenarians in the world. In that blue bullseye there, we have about 11 times more males hitting a healthy age 100 than you would expect to see in an equivalent population here in the United States. And most remarkably, 10 extra years at middle age, good years. And so and the point is, people aren't just living it to 100 and, coasting it out in some retirement home. They're still riding their bikes and chopping wood and beating a guy 65 years younger than him in an arm wrestle. And by the way, this guy's 106. I interviewed him at 7 in the morning, and he poured us each a tumbler of red wine. So I'm not making any comments on red wine for breakfast, but note to self anyway. So our survey of 300 or so centenarians, mostly male in Sardinia, revealed 3 the biggest predictors, and I'm going to tell you them in reverse order. Okay, so the 3rd biggest predictor in blue zone was how steep your village was. Was no superfood or no supplement or any of that, and not the altitude, by the way. Altitude had nothing to do with the steepness of the village. Strongly predicted life expectancy of the village. So note to self. Second biggest predictor, kind of a surprise here, was how many daughters they had. And the guys with the most daughters, 5 or more daughters, seem to have the best chance of making it at age 100. And now we don't know if that's because daughters tend to take care of their aging parents better than sons do, or or if it's a selection bias, i.e., if you if you can survive 5 adolescent girls making it to 100, it's no problem. But daughters are probably a good idea if you can produce them. And then the biggest predictor though was the profession. And Sardinia traditionally has been mostly farmers and shepherds, and the farmers aren't living any longer than their Italian counterparts, but the shepherds are. So we embedded with the shepherds. We spent about 5 days traveling with this modern day shepherds with ancient practices, and like his at least 100 generations before him, they survived as they pastured their animals for days or weeks at a time. They survived mostly off of an unleavened bread called carta de musica, made of semolina wheat, whole grain, unleavened, so it would last months at a time, until about 1965. So most of a centenarian's life, these shepherds lived off of this bread and their sheep's milk cheese. Now these are grass-fed sheep, very rich cheese, so they're not eating a ton of it. It's not like a pound of mozzarella on a Devani's pizza or Domino's pizza. It's a cheese and bread. It was most of what they ate until 1960. And then a type of very extraordinary wine called Cannonau wine. It's homemade, nothing like dirty boots to add terroir. But this wine has the highest levels of polyphenols of any known wine in the world. And they pretty much drink this all day, equivalent of maybe 3 glasses a day. But a little, midday with lunch, another glass with friends, another glass with dinner at night. And this is typically a fairly low alcohol wine as well, organic, of course. Things start to change in the mid 60s. Shepherds start to come home more, and they rely more heavily on their gardens. So this is a variant of the Mediterranean diet, but a variant very high in fava beans, and potatoes and gnocchi. And they do eat meat, but meat was a celebratory food, something enjoyed on birthdays or weddings or after church on Sunday, not something you have every day. No beef in this blue zone, traditionally speaking. Very little chicken. Maybe you have a few chickens running around the yard, but pork was the meat. And usually a family, they had a pig and they butchered it maybe one a year, maybe 2, and shared it with their neighbors. Salted the hams, rendered the fat for lard, which would last for a while. And they didn't really have refrigeration up here until 1990 or so. So this was their traditional. So remember, if you want to know what a centenarian lived to be 100, you have to know what they did most of their life. So you're not so interested in asking them, what are you doing today? You don't get a very valuable answer. You need to kind of look at the pattern over a century and kind of sum it up. So this is a summation. I'll tell you, though, that neither diet or exercise, the sort of things we obsess about, were all that important here. What were really important here were social connections, largely with the family, number one, first and foremost. So fanatic zeal with the family, secondarily with the community. And you start saying, why is this so important? Well, again, this is a Bronze Age culture pushed up into the mountains by originally the Phoenicians, then the Romans, then the Arabs. They just stayed up there. And new people on the island always meant subjugation. So they had to develop these very fierce social bonds because they had to rely on each other to survive. So you get this really sort of interesting, just fierce social connection, fierce family connection, reverence for older people. We in America, we tend to celebrate youth and honor youth. But here, the older you got, the more valuable you were. Why? Because they were the repositories of wisdom and resilience. You would never put your aging parent in a retirement home. That would shame the family. No. You keep them at home where they're contributing members of the family into their hundreds. The men, they knew the agricultural wisdom, when to plant, when to sow, what to do about pests, what to do about droughts, how to make the wine. Meanwhile, women were keepers of usually grandmas, by the way, that's grandma over there on the right, they're keepers of the food tradition. And like all these cultures, you find probably 60% of their longevity is their diet, which I'll get to later. But grandmas kept them eating the diet, and didn't let the frozen pizzas and the pudding containers enter the household. They're grandmas kept the starter dough for sourdough bread, which was eaten at every meal. 2 studies shown that the sourdough, first of all, it has about 1/100th of the gluten that a white bread would. Secondly, 2 studies showed to lower the glycemic load of a meal. Now, this isn't important for one meal, but it's important 3 meals a day for 90 years. And it's also, I would argue, the most maniacally delicious bread on the planet, Sardinian minestrone. But the secret is not so much the bread, it's the grandma. And something called the grandmother effect has shown that families that keep a grandma living with them or nearby, the children do better. They have lower rates of disease, lower rates of mortality. They do better in school. And it sets up this beautiful virtuous circle. Grandmas are living longer because they're engaged and they feel a sense of belonging, and they're physically active, and the children are doing better. So that explains a big chunk of why this population is living so much longer. On the other side of the planet, we had to travel on the other side of the earth to find the world's longest lived women. Island of Okinawa, you have a population where about 30 times more females are making it to age 100 than you'd see in an equivalent population in the United States here. Now, until 2000, Okinawa was the longest lived population in the world. It's kind of gone to hell, largely thanks to American fast food restaurants and freeways. But until 2005 or so, this was the base case for longevity. It produced the longest lived humans in the history of the world. Number one source of calories until for most of their history was purple sweet potatoes. Not only all the complex carbohydrate and protein of regular sweet potatoes, but that purple there is the same antioxidant that you see in blueberries, even richer sources. So about 70% of their caloric intake until the mid-70s came from purple sweet potatoes. A lot of tofu. Number one source of protein in their diet was not meat, not protein drinks, but tofu, artesian tofu, very firm, very good at absorbing the flavors and tasting like meat, quite frankly. If you ever get a chance to try Okinawan tofu, if you're not a tofu lover, if you get somebody to prepare it once, you'll be a convert. But this was about 8 times more tofu than Americans eat. But once again, more important than diet, what's their social constructs? So in the United States here, if you don't have 3 friends you can count on a bad day and with whom you can have meaningful conversations, that shaves about 8 years off your life expectancy. But here in Okinawa, when you're a little child, your parents put you in, they help you select a committed social circle of 4 or 5 people with whom you travel through life. And you share the bounty when things go well, and you can expect support when things don't go well. And I mean both financial and emotional support. And the reason I show this picture right here is these 5 girls in the foreground. Their average age is 102, and they've been friends for 97 years. They call this social construct a moai, M-O-A-I, moai. It's very powerful because the people here don't suffer loneliness. If you fall down in life, metaphorically, you got somebody to pick you up, to brush you off, you need to borrow some money. They typically didn't have really banks available to poor people until probably the 1990s. And so this is a really important idea. In America, according to the Surgeon General, about 50% of people, older Americans, are lonely. And that's as bad for you as a cigarette habit. These people don't have to think about it. We do. The other thing these people don't have to think about is retirement. There's no word for retirement in the Okinawan language. And this is a really important idea. I know you guys are investing and saving for quote unquote retirement, but retirement, blue zones teach us, is not a good idea. The most dangerous year of your adult life is your year you retire. Big spike in mortality here. People in blue zones, like this fellow here, he's a fisherman. He's 94. Check out those teeth. 102-year-old karate master. Continue to get up every morning and teach this martial art that originated on Okinawa. Kamada-san, she was the spiritual leader of her village. Kind of uniquely, women are the spiritual leaders in Okinawa. Her purpose, her ikigai, what got her up in the morning, they don't really call it a job, they call it ikigai. Altruistic minded sense of purpose was her great granddaughter. And these two girls are separated in age by 101 and a half years. And, I mean, the lesson I take away, just to kind of hit it over the head, not to say that you shouldn't be saving for your later years, optimizing those with, money. I'm going to get into this more later, but I've written 2 books and a geographic cover story on the statistical underpinnings of happiness. The trick with money is to have it but not want it. And when you have it, money is usually mostly good for getting rid of the quotidian, the day-to-day sources of stress. You get a flat tire, oh God, or appliance breaks, or you get a speeding ticket. With a big nest egg, you can just sort of wipe them away with a trivial amount of money. But you don't want to quit working. You don't want to quit meaningful pursuit that contributes to somebody else. That's the big secret you take away from Okinawa, and you'll see other blue zones. We found America's blue zone about 120 miles southeast of Los Angeles, down the San Bernardino Freeway, Highway 10 there. You get off at the exit, Loma Linda, and the first thing you see in America's blue zone is a Del Taco and a Wiener Hut. And it's like, whoa, what's going on here? Well, if you go back a little bit in Loma Linda, you have the highest concentration of Seventh-day Adventists, good Christians who distinguish themselves from other Christians. That number one, they evangelize with health. They run a lot of America's biggest hospitals, and they run it well, by the way. And number two, they celebrate their Sabbath, not on Sunday, but on Saturday. So from Friday night to Saturday night, they kind of close down, and they're not participating in, football games or dancing or clubs and that sort of thing, which makes them a little bit culturally remote. Other blue zones are geographically remote. These are culturally remote, which protects them a little bit. I love America, but there's a lot of corrosive effects here in America. Fast food restaurants and our dependence on the automobile and social media. These things aren't affecting people in blue zones and not affecting them, especially here. And you see the health benefits. So Adventists have been asserting for 150 years they're healthier than everybody else. And finally, about 30 years ago, at very good Adventist studies at Loma Linda, scientists at Loma Linda University got a big grant from the National Institutes on Health to follow 103,000 American Adventists to see if they actually do better. So in America here, life expectancy for women is just a little under 80. It's heading back to 80 pretty quick. But for Adventist women, they're living 9 years longer. And the men, that difference is even more dramatic. So think about this for a minute. This is not some exotic island off the coast of China or Mediterranean. This is a bunch of Americans that live next to the Wiener Hut, and they're living a decade longer than the rest of us. A decade. Well, how are they doing it? Well, my team embedded, we tried to untangle this. And again, it's only correlations, but I'll tell you, they take Sabbath very seriously. So while we might just ram through the weekend working or getting overly busy, they stop things Friday night. Friday night is dinner with the family. TV's off. They go to bed early. They get a good night's sleep. They wake up the next morning and very long religious services. This is one of their religious services. Then they Saturday afternoon reconnect with their friends, and this is a diverse population. They call them potlucks, and they get together and they reinforce their social relationships. And then on Sunday afternoon, they hardwired right in their scriptures. They take a nature walk. So this is not something they do every once in a while. They do it every week for years, a decade, or a lifetime. They get out with their friends. They get some fresh air. They relieve some stress, and they get some exercise. And it's the routine of this that's powerful. What's also powerful is their diet. They take their diet directly from the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. God says right there, diet of the Garden of Eden, every tree that bears fruit, that's citrus, like you see in the foreground here, but it's also tomatoes and avocados and apples. And then one stanza later, she goes on to talk about every plant that bears seed. So what is that? Well, it's not only sunflower seeds, but it's nuts, it's legumes, it's beans, peanuts, it's whole grains, it's rice, it's wheat, it's corn. So the Adventists actually listen to that and they follow it. They eat mostly a plant-based diet, and they know how to make it delicious. I wrote a book called The Blue Zone's Kitchen, cooked with a lot of these Blue Zone All-Stars, including Dottie here. She was a pilot, age 95, and she spent an afternoon showing me her favorite recipes. We were cooking up some low-sugar oatmeal cookies here, and I said, "Can I see your refrigerator? I wonder what a vital, disease-free 95-year-old eats." And here it was. And this was a powerful visual lesson for me. There's no bacon in there in this refrigerator, no full cream milk, no milk at all, no hot dogs, no juice boxes, no ultra processed foods of any kind. These were all foods your great grandmother would recognize. And she didn't set this up. I kind of sprung it on her, and it really drove home the point to me of a whole food plant-based diet. To drive home the point of what they do, we at National Geographic tell stories, usually of characters. I chose multimillionaire Ellsworth Wareham. He's like you guys. Got a smart wealth advisor, and he saved up, worth tens of millions of dollars. Yet when a contractor wanted $6,000 for a privacy fence, he's like, well, for that kind of money, I'll do it myself. Now remember, Ellsworth is 95 years old. And for the next 4 days, we followed him around as he shoveled cement and hauled timbers. And on the fourth day, predictably, he ends up in the operating room. But that's not Ellsworth getting open heart surgery there in the middle. That's Ellsworth on the left doing open heart surgery, which he continued to do to his 100th birthday and quit only because he didn't want to risk putting his patients at risk. But over 12,000 surgeries, he saw everything. You wanted him in the operating room if you were having serious heart surgery. Ellsworth Wareham, another great character, 106 years old, working cowboy, starts his day with a swim, and on the weekends he puts on the boards and went skiing. And then my favorite, Marge Jeton, woke up every morning at 6 a.m., read her Bible, oatmeal, and she's very prescriptive about her oatmeal. Steel cut, slow cook oatmeal with walnuts, dates, topped with soy milk, and followed by what she called a prune juice shooter. So she did that, and then pumped iron, rode her bicycle, and then got in her 1994 Cadillac, where she barreled down the San Bernardino Freeway, volunteering for 7 different organizations, including Loma Linda Senior Center. She went to help out the old folks. Remember, she's 105. The old folks in this case were about 70. So she was one of our great all-stars. I wrote up these 3 cultures for a book. I mean, a book, The Blue Zones, and a cover story for National Geographic. It was one of their 3 top-selling issues in their history. And for the first time, I had money, and I took that money and right away went and hired the demographers and continued the search for blue zones. We found a 4th blue zone in the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica. Amazingly, this is producing the population with the lowest rate of middle-age mortality in the world. Everybody listening here, if we have an average set of genes and we do everything right, best practice life expectancy, it's still only 95. I promise you 100. But if you're average, we can promise you about 95. A little more for women, a little less for men. This population does it better than anybody else in the world. They hit 95 at 2 to 3 times the rate that Americans do. And most importantly, they do it spending 1/15 the amount we do on healthcare. And it really is kind of a wake-up call for policymakers because, the manifest population, 1/15 you spend that we're suffering here in America, much better outcomes. How do they do it? Well, their traditional diet's been corn grown into tortillas, squash, and beans. And when you put these 3 foods together, you get a whole protein. They're cheap, they're shelf stable, they're perfect for the inner city. They also invest not so much in cleaning up the chronic disease mess. And for those of you who like facts and figures, about 85% of our $4.8 trillion annual healthcare spent is spent treating people with an avoidable chronic disease. Let's think about that. Think about bad investment. We're not very good at investing in healthcare. In Costa Rica, they invest in healthcare, keeping you healthy in the first place. So every man, woman, and child in Costa Rica is assigned a basic health team, a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a record keeper, and 2 mobile health ambassadors like Louisa here. Every single year, you'll get a knock at the door, virtual or real. Louisa will have your health records. They'll interview you about your habits. They'll screen you for depression. They'll take your blood pressure, maybe do a blood draw if necessary, go in your backyard and look for standing water that breed disease-bearing mosquitoes, or go into your refrigerator, which breed disease-bearing habits. And they'll catch a disease 15 years before it ends up in the emergency room as a $150,000 heart attack or a $72,000 a year type 2 diabetes problem. And they triage it rather than waiting for it to blow us up. Ironically, too, this healthcare system seems to favor poorer people. Poorer people actually are the healthiest people in Costa Rica, the longest telomeres. So in a sense, this whole sort of folly that you need to be rich to be healthy is really wrong. It's the case in the United States, but it's not the absolute case. And that's something to keep in mind. Finally, the last blue zone we found here in Icaria, Greece. This is just off the coast of Turkey. People live about 8 years longer here. Most significantly, no dementia, no discernible dementia in the entire island. They eat the purest form of the Mediterranean diet. A lot of beans, especially lentil beans and black-eyed peas and garbanzo beans. Ladies here, they know how to identify about 80 kinds of greens that grow into fields. These are the kinds of greens that we, weed whack or spray with Roundup. They recognize them for what they are, incredibly potent sources of antioxidants. They bake them into pies, make beautiful salads out of them, steam them with lemon and honey. They just know how to make these greens delicious. And it's a completely overlooked source of nutrition that we miss in America here. Their herbs here, rosemary, oregano, sage, and mint, are powerful, not only antioxidants, also anti-inflammatories, diuretics. They drink these teas every day for a lifetime, which might explain their low rates of Alzheimer's. But this is an amazing culture. The guy I decided to profile here is this little fellow on the right. His name is Stamatis Moriaitis. He went to America as a young man, 21, got a job as a painter, worked hard, married a Greek-American woman, bought a Chevy, a house in the suburbs. But at age 66, he found himself short of breath. He goes to 3 doctors, all of whom said the same thing. You have terminal lung cancer, get your affairs in order. You got 6 months. So instead of dying in Detroit, he moves to Icaria, buried with his ancestors. He and his wife move in with his parents, who are just fine in their mid-80s. But he starts drinking these herbal teas and eating this form of the Mediterranean diet and reconnects with his friends. At 6 months comes and goes. He goes in his backyard one day. He's feeling pretty good. He's supposed to be dead. And he plants a vineyard. To himself, I'm not going to be alive to see these grapes, but my wife will. And when my wife picks these grapes, she'll think of me. Well, to make a long story medium, 7 years later, when I met him, he was picking all these grapes himself and making 200 liters of wine a year, all of which he drank. And when I asked him what his secret to longevity, as I was pretty sure it wasn't his ability to match plaids, he just kind of shrugged and said, I don't know. I guess I just forgot to die. Which sounds like a terribly flippant answer, but actually he had the best answer of anybody I'd met in all the blue zones. Why? Because no matter where you go in the world, you see long-lived people. It's never because they try. They never say at age 50, well, go darn it, I'm going to get on that longevity diet, live another 50 years. They don't join CrossFit or buy an elliptical. In fact, none of them really know how they live so long. And the big insight here is that in places that produce real healthy longevity, remember what I said at the beginning of the speech? Most of what we think leads to longevity is ineffective or just plain wrong. They don't pursue health of any kind. We tend to think we got to find the right program, muster the resources, find the discipline, find the presence of mind and do it. Zones, longevity and health are not pursued. It ensues. That's the big idea. It's the product of the right environment. No matter where you go in blue zones, they're not really exercising, but they live in places where every time they go to work, a friend's house, or out to eat, it occasions a walk. They have gardens out back that keep them busy 10 months a year, moving. Their houses aren't full of mechanical conveniences to do their work for them. They suffer the same stresses that we do, their kids, their health, their money, but they have sacred daily rituals that help unwind the stress of the human condition. The Adventists pray. The Okinawans have ancestor veneration. The Mediterranean blue zones, they all take a nap, which are very good at reducing stress. They have vocabulary for purpose. But he talks about purpose as a longevity strategy, but taking the time to know what matters to you, what you're good at, and have an altruistic outlook, outlet for it, adds about 8 years of your life to your life expectancy, according to the National Institutes on Aging. They do drink a little bit. I'm very well aware of all the warnings against alcohol right now, but I, unfortunately or inconveniently, people in blue zones, the vast majority of them are drinking every day of their life, not rum and cokes or cosmopolitans, but organic low alcohol wine. But the fact is, wine is part of the diet, the human condition. When it comes to what they eat, very important here. We did a meta-analysis. My book, The Blue Zone Solution, unpacks this. But if you don't want to know what a centenarian ate most of their life, our meta-analysis shows 155 dietary surveys. They're eating 90 to 100% whole plant-based food, very high carbohydrates. I'm not talking about the jelly bean version of carbohydrates. I'm talking about the lentil bean version. Whole grains of every kind, greens and garden vegetables, tubers like sweet potatoes, nuts, and the cornerstone of every longevity diet in the world is a cup of beans a day. Cup of beans a day will confer about 4 extra years of life expectancy. That's where they're getting protein. They're not getting most of the protein from meat. Meat is a celebratory food, fewer than 5 times a week. Same with fish. No cow's dairy in any blue zone, so they're getting rid of dairy. And they don't they eat about a quarter the amount of sweets we do. And then when it comes to what they're drinking, water, tea, coffee of all kinds, wine, a little bit of wine. But this is the diet of longevity. They have strategies to keep from overeating, eating all their calories in an 8-hour window and leaving their digestive system to rest. And then the foundation of all these blue zones is how they're connecting, investing in their parents, keeping their aging parents nearby, taking care of their kids and their spouses. They tend to belong to a faith and show up. That confers about 4 to 14 extra years of life expectancy. And they really pay attention to who they let in the room with them. We know now that if your 3 best friends are obese or overweight, you're about 150% better chance of being overweight yourself. So they really surround themselves with the people that reinforce the right behaviors. So people look at this and say, sounds like common sense to me, but it's not common sense. You know, we spend only about 4% of our $4.8 trillion budget on prevention. Most of those are spent on diet and supplements and exercise programs. Not bad ideas, but they're very expensive and they fail for almost all people almost all the time in the long run. We don't pay attention to this, but the best diets, you get 100 people on them today, you're going to lose 10% of them in 3 months. You're going to lose 90% of them in 7 months, and all of them, all but 3% in your within 2 years. Now, if your wealth advisor showed you this rate of return, you would fire him. About 60 million people get on diets every year at New Year's, and we get the same results. Same with exercise programs. They fail for about 80% of people within a year. Gadgets and Fitbits and apps and that fail in the long run. I defy anyone to show me one that works for more than single-digit percentages after a year. Fitbit went broke. And even if I come home with the pill guaranteed to reverse longevity, Americans wouldn't take it long enough to make a difference. So if that doesn't work, what does? Well, people in blue zones, they're not taking pills or supplements or getting on Instagram and buying superfoods or running down to Central America for stem cells or shooting themselves up with their children's blood or taking Ozempic. Their journey to 100 is joyous. And a big point I get to make, having specialized on these topics for the past 20 years, is almost all the things that get you to a healthy age 95 also promote happiness, very real happiness. They live close to nature. They grow their own food. They sit down with their families and have dinners and make their family a priority. They know their sense of purpose, usually in their faith, but also in their family. I'm going to lose, for some reason, that's weird. I'm going to lose. Sorry about that. Something happened here. I lost my light. There it comes back. And they have a social life. They prioritize their friends. They prioritize their social connections, and they walk places. So the lessons we get from blue zones are very clear. They're eating mostly a whole food, plant-based diet, a peasant diet, really. They're moving naturally, not exercising, but an environment that nudges them into physical activity every 20 minutes or so. Their lives are underpinned with purpose. So they know why they wake up in the morning and they put their values to work. They surround themselves with the right people, and they live in places where the healthy choice is not only the easy choice, but often the unavoidable choice. And the secret to longevity doesn't lie in any one of these circles. Will have you believe there's a silver bullet. It lies rather in the interconnected, mutually supporting nature of this same cluster that keep people doing the right things, avoiding the wrong things, not for just a few months or a year, but for decades or for a lifetime. So they're not developing heart disease, most of which is avoidable, type 2 diabetes, 100% avoidable. Dementia, about 60% avoidable. Cancers, about 45% of which are avoidable. That's why these people are living a long time. They're living a long, happy life, largely free of disease. And when the end comes, it usually comes quickly, leaving a lot left over for their heirs. So I want to close very quickly with the mighty Sor Moriarty's, that old guy with the bad plaids. I wrote about him for the New York Times, and I called him up and I asked him, was interviewing him long after I met him first, and I asked him questions about how he got rid of lung disease and so forth, and he goes, I gave that a lot of thought. In fact, about 15 years ago, I went back to the United States to get some tests, and I said, "Yeah, what did you discover?" He said, "Nothing. I got back to the States and all my doctors were dead." So he's our poster boy of not knowing how he made it to 103 and happy the whole journey. So with that, Nathan, I'll kick it back over to you, and we can take some questions.
Thank you, Dan, for such a informative and inspiring presentation. I think we're all motivated to explore the Blue Zone learning, so thank you. I know you're doing work on creating Blue Zone communities and helping people try to figure out how to better connect with one another. Could you unpack that for us in terms of what that's about?
Yeah, so the key insight here is if you try to change people's or change their behavior, you're going to fail. There's not enough money in America to change 330 million people's minds. We can't agree on a president, much less on a diet. So the insight here is you want to shape cities so that healthy choice is the easy choice or the unavoidable choice. So I have my company has 185 people, and they're experts at helping city councils find consensus and stay focused on policies that favor healthy food over junk food and junk food marketing, favor the pedestrian over the motorist. Not saying that cars aren't important, they are, but humans are more important. So designing roads for humans and children, etc. Favoring the non-smoker over the smoker, and an alcohol policy that favors everybody. So you still there, Nathan?
Yep, I'm still here. We can see each other.
Your face disappeared, so I just wanted to make sure.
Not missing
and
anything.
then we administer a certification for all restaurants, grocery stores, workplaces, schools, and churches that agree to change their policies and their design so people mindlessly move more, eat better, socialize more, and know and live their purpose. And then we get 15% of the population who agree to optimize their social network in their home. So they're mindlessly doing those things. So it's people, policy, and places. And we've never failed at increasing the measurable health and well-being of a city. We get paid by insurance companies and hospital systems when we deliver. So this is a environmental approach to health and longevity, and it's been working fabulous.
Congratulations. So for listeners who are looking for ways to implement the Blue Zone lifestyle, what are some practical next steps? So in America, we're very, individualized. We live in our, bubble of wake up and go to work or come home and have our, 3 people that we interact with, turn on the TV, go to sleep. It's a very bubble-based culture that we have. And, if I went to someone that I met at a restaurant and said, hey, I'd like to talk about Blue Zones. Can we be friends? And, maybe they might arrest me. I don't know. Like there's just a mindset that's very individualistic that prevents community building. So what are some practical things that people can start to look to build more of a Blue Zone lifestyle individually?
All right, we'll start with people. I would argue the friends you choose to let into your immediate social circle have the biggest influence on how long you're going to live. Why? because friends tend to be long-term adventures. And number two, they have a measurable impact on your health. If your best friends are smokers, drink too much, are unhappy, are lonely, are fat, that's all measurably contagious. So I wouldn't say go to the restaurant and go up to a random stranger, but we all have friends that we've accumulated through life, through contacts. And to realize that this is far more powerful than getting stem cells or taking supplements, and just going through your contacts and reach out to them. You know, ideally they're people who live in your cities, but say, hey, you know, you identify your healthy friends who are active, who are mentally engaging, who eat a healthy diet, and say, hey, let's go out for lunch. I'll organize a dinner party and I'll invite 6 of them. And you got to make the effort. And we make, you know, we spend billions of dollars on anti-aging programs and concierge doctors and billions of dollars on diets. And if we just took those resources and spent it on taking people out for dinner, because it's becoming a friend is a function of how many times you see them. It takes about 6 times with an acquaintance. So sum up, identify a handful of people who are healthy, who are in your sphere, and bring them closer into the inner circle. So that's number one. Number two, what you can all do. Every time you go out to eat, on average, you're going to consume 300 more calories than you eat at home, than you would at home. Those calories tend to be laden with sugar and sodium and ultra-processed ingredients. Learn how to cook at home. Get yourself a good plant-based cookbook, page through it, find a dozen recipes you think you like, cook them with your family. And once you've found a half a dozen you like, my job's over, because you get yourself an Instapot, by the way. And Blue Zone Kitchen, my book, I know it's a little self-promotion here, but it was a #1 New York Times bestseller. That has got 100 recipes in there, most of which you can make in one pot. They're maniacally delicious. And then the third thing, you guys are getting to the point in your life where you got dough, you got the comforts you need. Now focus on identifying what your values are. Write them down. I'm a conservative. I'm a liberal. I'm a Christian. I'm a Muslim. I like animals. Women issues are important to me. Second column, what am I good at? Solving problems. I'm a good caretaker. I'm a good facilitator, whatever it is. And then the third column is what's an outlet for that? And you guys might still be working, but if you're not, best outlet is volunteer. No matter where you go in the world, volunteers report higher levels of life satisfaction, which is the technical word for happiness, than volunteers who don't. Or maybe it's with a family member, or maybe it's a new job that you pick up. But purpose has an outlet. It's not just, you know, I love sports cars. No, it's got to have an outlet. And believe me, it'll pay off in spades. So there you have them.
Thank you. The #1 topic that we're getting questions around is alcohol. So let's talk about wine. First, how do we navigate the social aspects of how alcohol shows up in our life to land in a place where it shows up in a more healthy or healthful way? And then we have a specific question: how do you feel about the U.S. government wanting to label alcohol as causing cancer? So what's kind of your insight on the alcohol, specifically wine topic?
Yes. So National Academies of Science, they agree that it does cause cancer. But overall mortality of moderate wine drinkers is lower. So even though your chance of cancer is a little higher, your chance of dying is a little lower, and your chance of dying from cardiovascular disease is lower as well. So, but overall, National Academy of Science will tell you that your mortality goes down. Now, that said, I would not advocate these epidemiology studies follow people who say they drink alcohol, which is defined as either an ounce of alcohol, hard liquor, a beer, or wine. Now, those 3 kinds of alcohol are vastly different. A rum and coke or a cosmopolitan are loaded with sugar, and an organic, homemade, low alcohol wine with polyphenols in it. That's a different animal altogether. Now, I can't recommend it to anybody. I can't, if you're not drinking now, don't start drinking. But if you're drinking a high quality organic red wine, I will tell you that these are populations, and I've seen the surveys, that 80 to 90% of people making it to 90 and beyond are drinking a little bit of wine every day. It's part of the Mediterranean diet. So if you're going around touting the Mediterranean diet, cannot not tout wine, because they all drink wine every day. So you have to draw your own conclusions, but I'll just give you the facts there.
Did
you put yourself on mute?
Okay. I did. I'm back. Okay. Thank you. I'd like to mention that everyone who is joining us for in person today at our 4 locations, we have a copy of the Blue Zone book available for you. So look forward to passing that on. And if you're joining us virtually and would like a copy, please message us or email us, and we'll make sure that you get feedback or get the book itself. Dan, you'd mentioned the topic of happiness and that you've done research on happiness. What is it that's there that connects so strongly to the Blue Zone topic, and what can we learn about your research on happiness?
So my book, The Blue Zones of Happiness, and the accompanying cover story attempted to harness big data to really get some clear insights. So there are these huge databases led by the Gallup World Poll, but also Latino Barometer, that have surveyed representative samples of 95% of the human population. And these surveys ask you how satisfied you are with your life, and then they ask you 75 other questions about your religion and how much you make and your gender and your age and how you eat and how you move. And through something called regression analysis, you finance people who understand this, you can see very clearly how strongly associated certain behaviors are with happiness. And the things that bubble to the top, most of them we've heard before, but I'll tell you perhaps some surprises. So the one we've all heard before is our social connections. So investing in meaningful relationships, it's not quantity that counts nearly as much as quality. 3 friends you can count on a bad day. But also associated, people who sleep 8 hours are about 30% happier than those people who sleep less than 6. So good night's sleep, super important. Volunteers report higher levels of happiness. Vegetarians report higher levels of happiness. People who work part-time report higher levels of happiness than people who work full-time. Churchgoers, higher levels of happiness. So you have to realize that about 40% of your happiness or lack thereof is dictated by your genes. Happiness is more heritable than longevity. 15% is luck, or whether or not you're born with chronic pain or crushing depression, or a fan of the Knicks or something, or a fan of the wrong basketball team. You're fine if you're a Celtics fan, right? Something like that. But about 40%.
It's tough being a Lions fan. Just saying.
Okay, that'll go against your happiness. But 40% is in your control, and those aforementioned things will stack the deck in favor of the purpose of happiness. But the number one thing is where you live. And the reason we know this is if we track unhappy people from places like the Soviet bloc countries as they move to Copenhagen, which is a very happy place, or from unhappy places in Africa or Asia, and watch them as they move to Canada, another very happy place. Within 1 year, nothing changes. Gender doesn't change, their sexual orientation doesn't change, their religion, their marital status, their education status doesn't change much. But within 1 year, they start reporting the happiness level of their adoptive home, which often represents a doubling of their happiness. There's nothing out there you can do that will double your happiness. So, as you guys grow your wealth and get some mobility, your best strategy for happiness is something nobody else is going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you. move to a happier place. And you can get on Gallups WBI World no, their well-being index, WBI, and they'll tell you the happiest places in America. But I'll tell you the features of the happiest places in America, they tend to be walkable. They tend to have access to nature. They tend to be on the water. They tend to be, more wealthy, quite honestly. But they're well-run cities with less traffic and less junk food. And the top ones, Naples, Florida. I know that's where you are right now. Comes out on top. Boulder, Colorado, Santa Barbara, California near the top. Pacific Northwest tends to be pretty high up there. Hawaii, that's the best thing. Why? Once again, just like longevity, it's not trying to change your behavior. It's your environment. It's what your environment drives unconscious decisions and unconscious influences, and that's what matters for the long run.
Thank you, Dan. Final question on the topic of money. You had mentioned that it's important to have money, but not want it. Can you unpack that more as we wrap up?
Yes. There's something called the hedonic treadmill. There's a lot of people who are chasing things. They want more things. They want new clothes and the latest gadget and the fanciest car and the bigger house. And we're an adaptive creature. So, we work harder, we make more money, we're able to buy those things. And what happens with buying a new thing, the luster of it wears off between 8 and 14 months. So after, a little over a year, you're going to be right where you were when you started. You're going to want the bigger, better thing. And that's like George Jensen on the treadmill, or a mouse on a mouse wheel. It just never stops. So you want to have enough money to cover your basic needs. You need food, you need shelter, you need health care, you need education or the ability to get more education. You need mobility. It's nice to have the money necessary to treat yourself once in a while. Constantly treating yourself doesn't do any good, but every once in a while, that phenomenal vacation or that phenomenal night off. And you want enough money to be able to pay away the daily strokes of bad luck or the things that you hate doing. Housework, great to have a cleaning lady. Mechanic to keep your car running, lawn person if you don't like doing the lawn work, childcare. Those are things we typically don't like. But after that, you don't need more money. It doesn't bring you more happiness. And so you want to have enough money to take care of the aforementioned and not have the sort of manic desire for more, because it's a happiness will forever lie on an ever receding horizon.
Great words of wisdom, Dan. Thank you. And that so aligns with our vision and mission to bring people to discover their true wealth. And true wealth has so many definitions and expressions beyond what's money in the bank account, which is important, but we want to know what the purpose of the money is and how fulfillment and happiness can really be the areas that everyone is cultivating. We want to thank you on behalf of everyone attending, Dan, for your time, the work that you've done. Great job. We're cheering for you as you continue your journey to take this message to the world and change the world. We also want to thank everyone who attended today for investing your time to be with us. For everyone in our in-person locations, we've got a great lunch available in the Eastern time zone and a brunch available for those in Mountain Time, and want to encourage everyone to get to know one another when you're in our in-person locations. Use these topics that Dan has explained today and expressed as motivation to meet someone new, have a conversation with someone that is in your workshop area today, and also take that home, take the books home and start to practice what we've learned about today. Encourage everyone.
Can I mention?
Please.
I just want to mention two things on the way out. One is a plug. First one, I spent about 10 years developing Zone's Kitchen, and now there's a Blue Zone's food, maniacally delicious in every Whole Foods in America in the freezer section. The best-selling plant-based food in America. I'd love if you try it. And more importantly, if you have a question that I didn't get to answer here, you can direct message me on Instagram at Dan Buettner, and I will personally answer it. So if you didn't get to it here, I'm available for you at Dan Buettner. So sorry about that. I just wanted to get those last two things in.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Appreciate your work and appreciate our time together. Look forward to spending some time in the canoe as well. So we'll be following up on that.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for your listening, everybody. And we'll see you when you're 100.
Deal. Be well, everyone. Thank you.